Welcome everyone to the UMetCal webinar that will introduce you to some of the basic tools within Articulate Storyline. My name is Tsvet, Ross-Lazarov, and together with my colleagues Fabienne and Tomislav, we're going to give you a brief introduction, and then you'll have a chance to work with some of those tools and gather some experience and see how they all work together to create engaging learning experiences. So for those of you who came to our workshop last week about Articulate Rise, we wanted to give you a very quick refresher on the capabilities of Rise, and that is, it is good for presenting information, and it is good to create test questions in order to see if your learners understood the information. Now, as all of you know, that's not enough in order for someone to learn new skills or learn new information. And when it comes to online learning, that is sometimes boring, and our learners may not pay attention, or they will be distracted by some other more interesting activity. So educational psychologists and learning scientists have actually figured out that if we want to engage our learners in meaningful learning activities, we need to make them do things while they're learning. So we need to give them real-life problems that they can solve. We need to make sure that those problems are immediately relevant to the work that they're doing and the knowledge that they're interested in gaining. It's a good idea to put the learners at risk a little bit. Also, to ask them to perform multi-step tasks. With other words, not every problem in the world can be solved by answering a single multiple choice question. We need to give our learners a number of different steps to perform, just like they will perform in the real world. Learners need to have a chance to practice and then make mistakes and then receive feedback. And then all of these elements combine together in order to provide learners with an environment in which they can try things, they can solve problems, they may fail, and then they will learn from their mistakes. In fact, it's very similar to the image on the screen. We have our learner working her way up the wall, solving problems, and then occasionally perhaps she may fall. And the belayer at the bottom is creating that safe environment in which mistakes can happen, and then the learner can get back to the wall and then try a different approach, receive feedback about what they could do or not do, and then will continue to work their way up all the way to the top of the wall. And this is where Storyline becomes so much more useful than Articulate Rise. We can create all kinds of interfaces in which our learners will be doing things similar to the tasks that they'll be doing in real life. So very quickly, here we have a hurricane forecast, and our learners get a chance to review the forecast and then send the communication messages to the public or to emergency managers. In the second interface, you see on the right side of the screen, the learners are traveling for a research project in another country, and they need to decide what tools and technology they can bring with them to that particular country, given various export regulations for technology in that country. We also have interfaces in which our learners are engaging in conference calls with others, either in Google Meet or Zoom and other places like that. So you can ask people questions and then you receive answers. We can also simulate a work environment on someone's desk, as you can see here, where they can click on the computer screen and then do basic research in order to answer questions from people who are either in their office or visiting. And then you can also see how they can receive feedback. In this particular instance, our learners were preparing a briefing, and then you see the reaction of the audience after the learners have given that briefing. And so in addition to see how disappointed people were, you can also see what the score was for that particular briefing attempt. And so you can see the rich interfaces that we can create and the rich activities we can create that are very realistic, very similar to what the learners need to be doing. And so Storyline is like a very powerful multi-tool. we have pliers, we have all kinds of knives, we have files, we have scissors, we have saws, we have screwdrivers, we have can openers, and many other things. Articulate rise is like a tiny little knife that maybe has a few knives and maybe scissors. So it does something very specific. But the people who are making Storyline and Rise are the same company, so that they have made sure that if we develop something in Storyline, we can import it into our Rise courses and make those courses a better learning experience for our learners. All right, so when you open PowerPoint when you open Storyline for the first time, it looks very much like PowerPoint. And so everything that you see on the screen, especially in this area here, are tools that you have used if you have used PowerPoint for any amount of time. All of the tools that are available here work the exact same way and perform the exact same function as PowerPoint. And so you already have a good start on Storyline. Now, the other tools that are within Storyline are something that we're going to go into a little bit more detail now. So the first and useful tool for us when we're creating e-learning is called the story view and scenes. So here you can see a very large e-learning project that is organized in different scenes. And some scenes can have a single slide in them, like these two scenes, and other scenes can have as many slides as we want. And you can also see all of these arrows and lines. They're pointing how the different scenes are relating together based on what the learners will be able to do inside. So this is a big picture that allows you to organize what is happening in your Storyline file. Now, another tool that is not present in PowerPoint is called a timeline, and that resides at the bottom of the screen underneath the main slide window. And this enables us to control all of the elements that are in the slide window. We can decide when to display things. So for example, if we don't want all of the information to be available at the same time at the very beginning, we can delay the display of that element until the learners have performed some kind of task. Now, the other thing that the timeline tool gives us is access to the states of every object on the screen. So you can see here, I have selected this button that says export of items, and it has 8 different states. And these states essentially are a different version of that button, depending on what the learners have already done. Some versions will show a message if the learners have been successful. Some states will show a message that indicates to the learners they've been unsuccessful. And so depending on what the learners are doing, we can start changing elements of the interface to respond to their actions. The other tool is called slide layers. So in addition to having a single slide, we can also layer information on top of it. And so, for example, if learners are performing a task, we can provide them with feedback that will appear only when they have either been successful or unsuccessful, depending on the type of feedback that we're providing our learners. So we can show information, we can turn information off, and so on, and in that way also control interfaces based on students' actions. And the tool that brings all of this together is called the action triggers, or just triggers. And essentially, this is the place where we tell Storyline what to listen for, so that when our learners are clicking on a button, we are telling Storyline what needs to happen when the learners are clicking on a button. And here is a very quick example of how the triggers work. In this instance, we want to change the state of an element on the screen. And so then we can select what state we want. In this instance, it's a person talking. And then we can decide when that state happens. And then in this instance, it is when the user clicks the submit button, and then we'll see a different state. So here it is again. We can click on the changing of state. Then we can select what state we want to show. And then we select when this change of state needs to happen. Now, another powerful tool inside Storyline has to do with variables. Storyline allows us to create variables in which we can record what the learners are doing or have done, or the kinds of choices that they have made. And so based on the information stored in those variables, we can take learners on a different path through our content instead of a path that perhaps they already know most of the information. We can send them on a path that helps them only work on information that they need to practice. And so you get a sense of the power now that is available inside Storyline as you're combining triggers and variables and states and slides. And the final tool that we wanted to share with you is the review tool. So when you're creating custom interfaces, it is always a good idea to test them. And other people can come to this particular website, which is available to anyone in the world as long as they have the address of your project. And then they can leave you comments about the interface. And then based on these comments, you can make changes. So you can very quickly go through a prototype cycle where you generate a new type of interface. You can show it to other people. They can be anywhere in the world. They can give you feedback about that new interface, and you can make changes, and then you can instantly republish and they can see them again. So this is one of those very useful tools for rapidly creating prototypes of different interfaces and tasks. So this is all of the presentation for today. The rest of our time together is going to be you working with Storyline in order to create different types of activities. Now, for the first exercise, we'll start with something straightforward. We'll start by using the jump to slide trigger to connect all slides based on an example that I will show you right now. All right. So here is what the final product of the exercise should look like. We have a communications coach who is introducing us to a couple of interesting ideas about communication. And so when I click on the next button, you can see that it takes me to an exercise that the coach has for me. And then here you can see the name of the slide that it jumped to in order to show me this exercise. And then I can select my answer to the question that she has given me, and then I will receive her feedback. And so here you're seeing all of the spaces that the learner is going to as they're clicking on different answers and buttons. And so you will use this area here with the names of the screens in the work file that you should be able to download right now with the links that Tomislav has posted in the chat. And the work file will look like this. It will just be one row of many, many slides, and your job will be to connect these slides in the order that you see on the screen here. So the links to get to this particular example are also in the chat, so you can have them available as you work on creating the triggers inside of the software. Now, if you want to create the jump to slide trigger, you can just double click on the first slide. And so we see our first screen here. And then you can go to the trigger area and that create a new trigger right up there. You can click on it, and then you see the menu that pops up, and it already has jump to slide selected. And now here by default, it will show you jumping to the next slide. But because we have a specific order in which we want those slides to be done, you can click on this particular link and then see all of the slides that are available. So I can select one of those slides, and then of course I can say okay. And now you see in the story view here how Storyline now is adjusting the order of the slides based on the jump to slide trigger that I just put in place. So by the time you're done, you will have a very cool branching structure of this particular exercise. All right. Do you have any questions before you get started? All right. So welcome back, everyone. Now, we're going to introduce you to a different way of creating an exercise. This time, it's going to use primarily layers and states as opposed to creating links among different slides. So you will need to download the second example working file, and what you will see in front of you is just a single slide. But if you double click on that slide, you will notice that there are quite a few things happening. And so we have a set of tabs with information that our learners need to look at, and then they'll be able to answer the question on the screen. And you see that our slide layer window is populated with many layers. And so one of the main tasks for you will be to select the first option of this particular question and then connect it to the layer that says option 1 here. And so in order to do that, you need to use the trigger that says show layer. So here we are at the same trigger window again, and we can now select a different action. So instead of jump to slide, we can select show layer. And now you see that we have a list of all of the available layers on this particular slide. And then I can scroll down to option 1, and then I can select it. And then it will happen when the user clicks option 1, which is precisely what I want. And so we can say OK, and then we can go in the preview area and just take a look to see if it's worked. So we can wait a few seconds for Storyline to generate the preview for us. So now if I click on the area, I see the feedback that will appear on layer option 1. And so then I can click the try again button, and right now nothing happens because we've only made the connection between the answer option and the option layer. We have not made the connection back to the main layer on this particular slide. So we can close the window, then we can scroll up to option 1. So we can double click on the layer, and so this is the text that we just saw on the screen, and then this is our try again button. And so in order for us to make the try again button work, we have to add a new trigger. And so in this particular instance, we can also say show layer, or if we wanted to, we can say hide layer. So we have two ways of getting to the base layer on this particular screen. So let's use hide layer here. And so we'll say hide the current layer when the user clicks the try again button. All right. So here is our hide layer trigger. Let's take a look and see how it will behave. And the more complex our screen gets, the longer the preview takes. And so as we're adding more triggers, it will start getting a bit slower. So here we are. I can click on option 1, and then try again button brings me back. Now notice that right now, the first option that we clicked on is selected. It's highlighted in white, and that lets the learner know that this is what they have just clicked on. Now, this makes it very easy for our learners to eliminate the options from this particular question, and that will help them to arrive at the question without actually knowing the answer. And so we'd like to make it a little harder for them by returning the first option that they've clicked on back to its original state, the way that these other options look like. So the way to do that is to change the state of our option in the question. And so here we're on option 1 layer. And so we can click on the try again button. And then we can add a new trigger. So we can select change state of, and then from here, we can see a list of all of the objects on this slide that we can change. And so you can see there's quite a few of them. And as I'm moving down through the list of options, you can see how Storyline is showing me which element I have selected right now. And because we're working with option one is the answer option that we want to change the state on. And then we have different states that we can change this option to. We can disable it so that the learners won't be able to click on it again. We can show that it was selected. This is what was happening the previous time, or we can say normal, and that is its default state, the way that all the other answer options will appear. So we can select normal, and this is happening when the user clicks the try again button, and that is precisely what we want. So then we do OK. All right, let's test and see what's the result of adding 2 triggers to the same button. So here we are. I will click on the first answer. I will see the feedback. Then I will click try again. And it looks like everything is working precisely the way we want it to. And so this is something that you could do for all of the other options on the screen. So again, the easiest way is to drop to the base layer, and then we can select the next option in the list. And then from here, we can add a new trigger to actually show a layer. And then we select the layer called option 2 when the user clicks option 2 in the question. And then we can say OK. And now we need to go to the option 2 layer, which is this one. And then we can click on the try again button. And then we can add our hide layer trigger. So this layer will disappear when the user clicks the try again button. And because we want to make it harder for our learners to answer this question, we also need to add the trigger for changing the state. So this time we need to select the state for option 2. And then we press OK. And now you might say, oh, wow, I have to do that for all of the options and all of the buttons. Well, Storyline has a couple of helpful tools in this regard. So I can select the triggers in the trigger area, and then I can copy them using the copy button. And now I can go to option layer 3. I can select the button, and then I can paste them. Now, these will be the triggers for layer 2. So we need to make a couple of changes here. So the first trigger is OK. We want to hide the current layer that we are on, but the changing of the state needs to be for option 3 rather than for option 2. So we can very quickly click on this and then select option 3, and then we'll be set. And then again, we can go to option 4, and then we can click on the next button. So this is the correct feedback. And so we want the learners to be able to jump to another slide. And so if we had another slide in our project, this is where we would click in order to select where we want to go next. So in this instance, we can just say next slide, but there isn't a next slide. So our button isn't going to go anywhere. If we wanted to change the states, we can just paste the triggers here. So we can disable the hide layer because we want the learners to jump to somewhere else. So we can click on the little cross icon here, and then we just need to go back and change the state of option 4 to be back to normal. All right, so this is how you use change state and show and hide layers in order to create an exercise with just a single screen. All right, do you have any questions? All right, so if you don't have any questions about this particular exercise, do you have any other questions about storyline that we can try and answer for you in the few minutes that we have? Yes, Laurel, please.
I was wondering how you decide when to use states versus layers. It seems like a state allows you to change what the user is seeing in response to an action, but also showing a new layer allows you to change what the user sees in response to an action. And I wonder how you decide when to use states versus layers.
Yeah, excellent, excellent question. It always depends on the kind of activity that I'm trying to create. So in this particular instance, because I have made the choice to show the feedback on the same slide, the easiest way to do that, and the one that's easiest to understand from a programming point of view, is to create a different layer and then overlay it. It's quite possible to also create a state and then make it hidden. And then when the learner does something, you can turn it back on. This is what's happening with this particular button here, where we have, oh, actually, no, I think I also have a layer here on that one. Let me double check. Yeah, there it is. There's the layer. So this button just calls that layer. But it's quite possible to create a hidden element on the screen. And then in the states, you can select hidden. And then when
Yes,
the learners do something, then it would appear. And so a lot of it depends on the design of the exercise. Fabienne, go ahead.
yeah, I just wanted to say I usually use the states when I only want one object to change. So for example, a button, or also when you have a multiple choice question and you want to highlight the selected answer. And the layer I use as soon as I want to display some additional information. Or also when I want to kind of replace some part of my slide. For example, I have a button where I can click for more information or for further details. So I would have different states on this button, but then I would use a layer that kind of shows the additional information then.
Now, there is something that, Laurel, you may find interesting about the use of layers or different slides when deciding to provide feedback. I wanted to pull up a example of a lesson that I'm currently working on. Let me browse. So this one is a very curious setup. So I have a main timeline here where the learners are doing something that takes the learners to this particular scene where they're making a bunch of different selections, and we are capturing their click in the risk matrix, and we're capturing the value of their click, and then we're also capturing the value of the answer option that they have clicked on here. So in this situation, when you're capturing variable states or variable values, it's a little better to put them on a separate screen than the initial screen where the action may be occurring, so that then you can give Storyline a chance to record the new state of the variable, and then when it returns to the previous screen, that screen can now work with the updated state. Sometimes when you try to do that with layers, there is a bit of a delay between the user action and Storyline actually capturing the new value on that layer. And so if you're doing a variable heavy exercise where you're tracking what the learners are doing, it is better to organize it in this way, where the feedback and the exercises are actually separated, so that you can give Storyline the chance to encode the new value and then work with the new value to show you the feedback. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, this is all very helpful. Thank you both for sharing those thoughts.